Hello and welcome to Book Lust. I'm Nancy Pearl. My guest today at University Bookstore is novelist Jamie Harrison. Jamie, thank you for coming up from Montana to sit at this table and talk to me about your new book, The Widow Nash.
Thank you for having me.
Your older titles, which I also loved.
Thank you.
So I have many questions. I loved The Widow Nash. It was one of those books that when I read the first page, I could barely put it down to do anything else. And where did the idea for this come from?
About 10 years ago, I actually sort of almost had a vision of a woman just stepping off a train and running away, bolting. And I think the other way I came up with it, I had a great-great-grandfather who had left journals. They were filled with newspaper clippings, bad poetry, mining receipts, and he was a mining engineer, and he traveled around the West in the 1860s until 1900, and he had two daughters. One of them was my great-grandmother. I had a photo of her on a horse, and she went on to have a horrible marriage. She traveled with her sister, with her father, and I sort of I put her together with this woman who should disappear, and started writing about Dulcy Remfrey, whose father was a mining engineer, got some problems, and just went from there.
Was it an easy book to write because she was so real to you?
It was fun in that way. Mm-hmm. I had to rewrite it, I had to rethink it, I had to sort of restart it a few times and try to figure out how to tell it, but she was easy to write. I enjoyed her.
So when you're talking about the book, how much do you give away about what happens? Or what do you say? Maybe that's a better way of...
I have to talk about the fact she runs away part of the way into it, and I have to talk about why.
Right.
I've figured out that I really have to give that much away, and in fact the book cover gives it away, so so I do that, and then I sort of stop. I try not to get into the full reasons why or how she manages it, but yeah, I have to pretty much give it away.
So basically she's running away from a bad marriage.
She's running away from something that feels like it's inevitable that she just can't do. She has to save herself. I think she has to reinvent herself.
Yeah. Do you find that one of the interesting things about writing fiction is that you can take a what if, a series of what ifs, and some of it arises from your own life, and then you add on other people's lives and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I thought of a woman getting off a train, I thought, what would make her do it? And what would she do next? And it can be, yes, you throw in your moods, you throw in situations, you throw in something you
had read years ago.
Yeah, and then gradually pare away if you're me. I throw in too much and then I simplify. I'm a great believer in throwing stuff out too, even if I reuse it later, in something else.
So you're not literally like...
No, I don't burn any manuscripts.
Right. Like Thomas Carlyle's maid tossed the history of the French Revolution by mistake into the fireplace. Was this a much bigger book at one time, or did you imagine?
No, I just threw out things that didn't work. And I will reuse them, or things that were... I tend to want to put everything in. And then you pare down.
And do you have a reader who's like your first reader that you have great...
Probably my husband, yes. My husband read it, my parents read it, and then I really rewrote. I had a great agent, great editor, and they helped me rethink it, sort of. And sometimes I would go further than they wanted me to go. Every time I'd sort of look at it again, I'd think, I'm not in love with my own prose. You know what I mean? I don't mind.
Yeah, right.
If you've had a little break, it's easy to sort of cull things that just don't work.
Or you don't realize that you've used the same unusual word twice on a page.
Right. There's that, or there's just looking for too many adverbs. You can search ly and then just cut.
Yes. So. Yeah. And I think then how many adverbs we must use in our ordinary speech, that it would then translate into our writing. So the book, The Widow Nash, has been described by many people as a feminist Western.
Which is odd. It's set in the West. I mean, I think I had to write a little piece on gritty feminist Westerns, and I was trying to figure out how this fit into it, and basically we're just all born equal and everything else can gum it up. I wanted to give her some freedom, and she's born in a period where it was hard to have your own life. And for Dulcy, she had to have it by running away and pretending to be somebody else.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I think a lot of people, I certainly felt, God, I wish I had done that at some point in my life. Don't you? You sort of this kind of wish fulfillment that you find.
I agree. I think there's times in your life when everybody probably should run away.
Yeah.
I remember when I was living in New York years ago, I was miserable. I was working at a place called Dean and DeLuca and cooking, and I suddenly thought I'll just get on a boat for Australia. And I didn't, but a few years later I did get in a car and go to Montana. So.
And Montana's, I've sort of felt, you know, we clump together Western, not clump is the wrong word, but we identify writers living in Montana, Wyoming, you know, as West California's Western writers. And then we do the Southern writers. Yeah. But there's no, there's not a group of Midwestern writers or that we identify as such, I don't think, or flyover state writers.
I kind of mind the idea that anybody who lives in the West, Midwest, that they're regarded as oddities. That's sort of, I mean, Roxane Gay is in Indiana, right? It doesn't really make any sense. And I do mind, since I left New York 30 years ago, the idea that the West is this sort of parochial place. One thing I wanted to do in the book is talk about how varied it was even 100 years ago. I mean, how many different kinds of people lived there, how they read books, how they traveled, how they ate good food.
How they lived.
How they lived. It's not so different.
Or made lives for themselves.
Right.
Were there parts of the book, it's always hard to talk without giving anything away, so let's try not to.
Okay.
But were there particular parts of the book that were more difficult for you to write than other parts?
I had fun writing all of them, but finding a way to make what I wanted to pull off come clear was hard. It's the balancing act of too much information or too little. And I tended to give too little information, and really most of the editing was like, you need to make this clearer, you need to make it clearer. I kind of like having to guess when I read a book, and so I tend to hide too much. That was the hardest part.
Yeah, I think that books that I tend to like a lot are books where there is a lot between the lines, where there's stuff that you really want to think about. And I think that in this book, there is, you know, that you did make it clear, but it's not like you're telling us everything. I mean, there's still a lot that we can wonder about the characters.
Well, good, because it's very hard to have any perspective, as you know, when you're writing.
Right.
It's all in your head.
So tell us about the main male character. Let's say the good main male character.
He was fun. I don't know. I wanted to come up with somebody who was interesting, who wasn't too good, who would make her uneasy. I really wanted to kind of try to write about the past. People had lives back then, and they did naughty things, and it wasn't just rich people who got away with it, or Bloomsbury types. And I wanted to come up with something that was believable, that sort of caught the tippy balance of falling in love, and tried to get a past without nostalgia. Lewis was a lot of fun to write. He's a newspaper man, he's this, he's that. He was fun. I don't know where he came from.
Well, you know, I've talked to several mystery writers who talk about the amount that they fell in love with their heroes. And of course, I never spoke to Dorothy Sayers, but you know, Dorothy Sayers and her
Lord
Peter
Yeah.
Was the love of her life. And I think in some ways maybe that happens.
I think it definitely happens. Yeah, I guess I really was sort of in love with Lewis. I certainly was in love with Lord Peter when I read
yeah,
Dorothy
right.
Sayers. Yeah, and I'm sure that's true. When I wrote these earlier mysteries, I wrote, they're set in a town in Montana called Blue Deer. I certainly sort of fell in love with Jules Clement.
Right.
But there's that other kind of odd part of you where you are that character. So,
right. Exactly.
you know.
Right.
And
yeah. I have to say, the sense of place in all of your books, I mean, I read At the Edge of the Crazies, which is the first Jules Clement mystery set in Livingston, set in fictional Blue Deer.
Well,
and well, you know, this is what I was going to say. I gave it to a friend. I was working at the library, and I knew he was from Montana, and I said, you know, here's a mystery you might like. And he read it, and he came back, and he said, oh my God, he said, that is Livingston, Montana, where he grew up.
Oh, really?
And he said he could follow the characters down the streets, and he knew everything about it. And that wonderful sense of place, I think you accomplish here too.
Well, thank you. I've lived there for a long time, and you have a lot of time to notice how your town works.
Right.
And I love living there.
At the Edge of the Crazies.
At the Edge of the Crazies. It's a windy, cold place, but it's a great place. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that that one of the problems with writing what turns into a genre is that then it's going to be shelved with those,
Yes.
and classed with those.
I have a bone to pick with that. Yeah.
I do as well. So I do as a librarian and as a reader, because you miss so much if you just focus on, say, the mystery section or the westerns.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
No, please
Yes.
don't. And this is set
Right.
in New York. It's set in Seattle. I do mind that. I mind the I sort of minded. I think some of the best novels have been mysteries. I think there's no reason to pigeonhole things, and I think, say, Kate Atkinson is a good example of that. There's tons of good examples of that. Historical fiction, that label. When does history begin?
Yes, yeah. Evidently now it begins. It has to be pre-World War II.
Okay.
That's what someone told
good
me.
to
That's
know.
when history begins.
Right. Is it your living memory?
Exactly.
Or,
Right.
And I grew up in a family where I had great grandparents who told stories about the 1880s. Wow. I had a family that told a lot of stories, all sorts of stories, constant fabulations. So I don't know. I don't get the label. I was in a friend's bookstore recently, and she had a historical fiction section, and then she had other books that were historical fiction, you know, set historically throughout the store. So she had Hilary Mantel in the historical fiction, but then it made no sense.
Right.
I mean, how do you label Hilary Mantel as historical fiction when you write on that level?
Yeah, and Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove, for example, like, you know, to put that with westerns like Zane Grey or Louis L'Amour, I mean, it does a disservice. It does, yeah, that's what I was going to say. And I've always hoped that we could get beyond those kind of genre designations. And I've been thinking, I was making a list of, somebody asked me to come up with 10 books that I really loved and then tell her what they had in common. And they had nothing in common except the fact that they were all smart and funny. And that designation, for me,
which is what we like to read.
Which is what we like to read, it's sort of, you know, she said, well, what does that mean, smart and funny? And then it's difficult to, and I sort of resorted to Justice Potter saying, you know, I don't know, you know pornography when you see it, when he did that on the Supreme Court, you know smart and funny when you see it.
That's a good line. Yeah, I don't know. Books that are alive, books that you believe,
right.
Books where you can hear.
Yeah, yeah. I did feel that that these people were. I think you did a magnificent job. I have to say.
Thank you.
And I could see these people, and I knew them, and I was fearful for her.
Oh, good.
You know, I wanted her to succeed in that escape, and then I wanted to see what was going to happen to her next.
Well, thanks.
And I'm not a plot reader.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a character reader,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was her that I was following through.
Okay.
So I think you
you
did a fabulous
Thanks,
job.
Nancy. It was fun to write. It's
Uh-huh.
fun to make stuff up.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is. And whether it's just sort of full blown out of your mind, or you know, you take a little bit from this person that you know and a little bit from that person, and you know that some orthodontist you knew had arcade games in his office to keep kids busy while they were waiting for their, all that
Just
stuff
silliness.
can go in.
It can be a line of dialogue at a dinner
Right.
party or from
Yeah.
a bar. It can be what Nick Offerman calls shower thoughts. You know?
Uh-huh.
Just, yeah,
Huh.
fit it all in.
Who do you read for sort of feeding
Pleasure?
your soul or pleasure?
Oh, feeding my soul. I stopped reading mysteries for a while because I started getting annoyed. I started
Uh-huh.
seeing too much. I was thinking too much that way. One of the last books I read that I just adored was Euphoria by Lily King. I just read Lincoln and the Bardo, and the amount of heart in that book just blew me away. I loved it. For feeding my soul, sometimes I read poetry. You know, I'll read essays. I'll read right now Penelope Fitzgerald, and that's sort of doing just for the sheer beauty of the writing.
Are you reading The Blue Flower?
I'm on the Blue Flower now.
Uh-huh.
I was reading the Golden Gate first. It's in the. I have a three
Right,
volume
right.
thing.
The bookshop, the one in the bookshop.
Yeah,
have
that's
you-
the first one in
Yeah,
there. And
right.
yes,
Yeah,
but anyway.
and then
yes.
the people on the houseboats in the Thames.
Yes, yes.
I can't
Yeah,
remember.
I can't either,
remember.
too. So this is.
Yeah,
it,
but she's somebody, I mean, what I think, what I'm saddest about, I mean, there are many things I'm sad about at this particular moment, but one of the things is that we pay so much attention to new books and new authors, and we forget that any book that you haven't read is a new book.
Exactly.
And I just would like, I would like more reprints and bringing back into print. I mean,
I haven't had enough time to read lately, or I haven't
Yes.
given myself.
Yeah.
I have a side job.
Right.
I've been writing. I have a complicated family, and so yes, I've been going back. I've been reading Nabokov short stories. I've been trying to just read good stuff, and yeah, that feeds my soul. And then in newer writers, yeah, Lily King.
she's a wonderful.
I do like Kate Atkinson, and
Uh-huh.
if I want to read something that makes me wonder how she can pull it off, she does a high wire act with plot and with characters that I really appreciate.
Right.
I love reading Hilary Mantel, Michael Ondaatje. You know, I've been anything I've missed from those people, I'm going back and mopping
Now,
up.
Hilary Mantel did before she became so well known for those new books. She did a couple of wonderful ones. 8 Months on Gaza Street, about a British
I haven't
woman.
read that one, but I've read a couple of them. I've read, was it The Giant?
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
And I read, let's see, nouns are the first thing to go.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I
A
admire
Change
her
of
writing.
Climate.
A Change of Climate.
Is wonderful.
And I was actually just reading, she's got a series of lectures that she's doing now on historical fiction,
Oh.
and that's smart to
Oh.
read. I think I read The Guardian had a link to them,
Uh-huh.
and I was just reading that last night, actually.
Do you think you'll go back to mysteries? I mean, I would love At the Edge of the Crazies to come back into print. I don't think it's in print.
It's not in print right
And
now.
I still have, which I meant to bring, my paperback copy of it. I do. I mean, you know, I like sort of quirky, odd mysteries, and plus I love anything, pretty much anything set in Montana, and the combination in that book.
Well, I hope they're reprinted. And
Yeah.
I have a couple of them. I have rough drafts of a couple of other mysteries that I could go back and
with different
and work
characters.
on with different characters. And in a weird way, the book I'm writing right now, which is also set in that area, kind of brings things together a little bit.
Oh.
A couple of characters from this book actually appear in there, and it's set, but it's a contemporary novel.
Oh, really?
About a woman who sort of telling her life and her family's stories through all the fiction she's written unsuccessfully over the last 20 or 30 years. So it's fun to try to write.
Oh my gosh. What stage are you at?
About 150 messy pages dotted throughout. I don't seem to be able to write in order.
Did you have input into the cover of the Widow Nash?
I did. I actually did. I didn't. There's some back and forth about what it should be, if it should be just a landscape, if it should be something sort of graphic that pulled up off the images that are in the book. And finally I found this picture. She was an actress named Maud Feely. And they, Counterpoint hired a very talented person to sort of do a painting of her face. But what's convenient about somehow having picked Maud Feely accidentally is there's all sorts of photos of her, and it's fun to plug them in. I use one as my Twitter feed. It's another Maud Feely shot, and it's just the Widow Nash.
Yes.
But yeah, I looked at a lot of images while I was writing the book and put some of them in. There's a picture of Salome and the head of John the Baptist, and some black troops in Yellowstone Park in 1900. And I had them all over my office wall, and any time I hit a period of real writer's block, I'd just look at picture books. I'd look online, I'd look at paintings of the era, etchings, and it helped.
Yeah.
It was really fun.
Was the writer's block, I mean, I know it was probably really painful to go through.
It wasn't so much block, it was if I had to do other work for a while, and then I'd have to try to get back in and just sort of grinding back into, it's hard to write a book if you actually can't write every day because of the situation in your life.
Right.
So the stop and start.
And especially I would think a book like this that's set 100 years ago, that you have to kind of transform yourself back into that period. Or was that fun?
That was fun. It wasn't so much the period as really my unnecessary over-plotting at some stages in the thing. It's like, wait, what did I do? What page do I say this? And again, it's trying to not say too much and to play it out in the right order.
Did you have a sense that you never would have stopped editing, but they said you've had the second page through past?
No, I would have loved to have stopped editing. What would happen is I would sort of have somebody read it and wait, and by the time they got back with their comments, I'd be ready to look at it again and take it. I used to edit, and so I appreciate an editor. They're usually right. And if they're not, you can argue.
Right.
It's hard to sort of accept sometimes, but they're,
But when you were at the stage where you were going through looking for typos and stuff like that.
I'd keep pruning. Yep.
Yeah. I mean,
right.
it's hard to. I think it's very hard to look at your own writing. Well, you're right. What you said before, you have no distance from it.
You have no distance, but it is hard to look at your own writing. And at this stage where I'm doing readings, I'm like, gosh, why did I say that?
I know. And how did you decide what part you were gonna read? What parts do you read?
It's hard because there's so much sort of impolite stuff in there. Actually, there's the character of the father, Walton Remfrey, has syphilis. It's well-earned syphilis, and I hadn't quite bargained for how much I was going to have to edit out.
Well, where did he come from?
He really, I don't know. I enjoyed when I did a lot of research at the beginning, and then I sort of put it away to actually write. But I loved kind of odd websites for illnesses of the period, the whole quack medicine era. I loved looking at advertisements and stuff like that, and I had already thought that he should either have dementia or something. He loses his memory and he loses a bunch of money, and I came up with syphilis.
Yes, syphilis is better than dementia. Dementia,
and so,
and especially the delight he takes in how. In his hard-earned syphilis, I like that.
Yeah.
Didn't come by very lightly.
But he, you know, and he's a mining engineer. My
Yeah.
great-grandfather, really great-great-grandfather was, and these journals that he left were interesting. This man, William Ludlow, who was my great-great-grandfather, had sailed, he was a Cornish orphan, and he sailed to Nicaragua in 1864 with his brother, and then worked his way, went down to Chile, came up through Mexico. His brother stayed in Mexico, in the settlement of Cornish people that's still there. Apparently they're
Wow.
part of the reason there's Mexican soccer.
Wow.
Was the settlement of Cornish. And he worked his way up through the California gold mines and copper mines and silver mines. And he left these notebooks, and so it was just something to kind of riff on. It gave me an excuse.
I can't end this without just saying that another feisty woman of the West, another book that I read was Dalva,
Oh, haha. Yeah.
Fire Dad. And I just, and when I first read At the Edge of the Crazies, I had no idea you came from a writing family. And, but Dalva was a book that, like The Widow Nash, I think meant a lot to me. Especially I read Dalva quite young, when I was quite young. And it just meant a lot to me about women and
How to, yeah. She's a great character,
Yeah.
Dalva. And my father, in his writing, came by, a lot of people were critical of his portrayal of women.
Yeah.
I can say as
Right.
one of two daughters that he had that didn't come out in our lives in any way, and I thought she was a great character. And I got to read, I was his early reader
You
on
were.
that one. Yep.
Oh, that's.
And yeah, it was a
Yeah.
great book.
Yeah. Well, I wish you and The Widow Nash all good things coming to you.
Thank you,
and
Nancy.
I really look forward to the next book as well.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.